Welcome to another episode of the Data Researcher and HG Researchers series. I'm Fuyun Wong, Senior Advisor in Digital Pedagogy and Practice at Buckinghamshire New University. And I'm going to let my co-host introduce himself before I introduce the speaker of the day.
Hello, I'm John Brindle, everyone. Nice to see you all. I am Learning Design Manager at Edge Hill University, and also a PhD student at Lancaster University as well.
Oh, I forgot about that because there's kind of I'm trying to forget about my PhD. I'm just going to pretend it's not happening. Maybe one day it will finish itself, but it won't. Anyway, today we're not here to talk about my or John's PhD, although you're very welcome to give us advice. But today I am very honoured to have my boss from BNU, Dr. Katharine Hubbard, here to talk about her journey on becoming from a plant biologist to now a director of essentially a teaching learning center. So she is the director of learning enhancement and academic practice. I sit in her team, and I will pass the mic over to Katharine to talk about her wonderful journey in academia.
Lovely. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces this afternoon. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about my journey into educational research and leadership, sort of thinking about how I've developed my career. So I'm Dr. Katharine Hubbard. I'm National Teaching Fellow and Principal Fellow at the HEA, and I'm Director of Learning Enhancement and Academic Practice at Buckinghamshire New University. My email address is on the screen. We can circulate it. Note that I have an unusual spelling of Katharine. If you can't spell my name right, your email won't reach me. I guess there's a bit of a filter in there, but that's where you can find me. And I'm going to open this talk with a concept that's been quite important to me as I've gone through my career. So I sort of first heard about this concept about 15 years ago, which I'm always a little bit nervous about talking about concepts from other cultures. But there's a Japanese concept which is called ikigai, I think is the way you pronounce it. And it's effectively your reason for being, your reason to get up in the morning. Why do you do what you do? So it's sort of it's one of these things that is Japanese in origin, but it has been morphed a little bit into a Western mindset. But it has its origins in there. And your reason for being, you can sort of position as the center of four different things. Okay, so you can have if what you're doing on a daily basis, these four things are there, then that's the reason you get up in the morning. So first of all, you love doing what you're doing, you're good at it, the world needs it, and you're paid for it. If those four things align, then this is the sort of concept of ikigai, of your reason for being. So what I want to do is to sort of talk a little bit about my journey, where this kind of has mapped out and where it hasn't, and then think about how I've moved, as Fuyun says, from being a plant biologist to being director of a teaching and learning unit. Here's a summary. So I'm going to sort of do this as a bit of a career timeline. I'm just moving that out of the way. So my PhD journey. So as I say, I trained as a biologist. So I did my biology degree, and I then went and did my PhD in plant biology. Straight after my degree, didn't do a master's, went straight to PhD in a really brilliant research lab in Cambridge. So it was the lab of Dr. now Professor Alex Webb. And I worked on circadian rhythms in plants. So you have an internal body clock. Your body knows what time of day it is. Plants also have an internal body clock. So if you put a plant in a growth chamber where it's light all the time, the plant will still know when it's night and dark, and will still try to do daytime things during the day and nighttime things during the night, even though the lights are switched on. So there's some kind of like molecular genetic mechanism in there. So, as a PhD student, I was a biologist. I was looking at genes. I was videoing plants doing this and seeing how fast they went up and down, because that told me about something about their genetics. I was using fancy microscopes. That was definitely, that was my world. That was where I came from. I was going to be a biologist. And I was, I think as a PhD student, I hit ikigai. I was in that happy zone of, I was doing something important because it turns out the clock is important for crop productivity, for example. So there's a lot of agricultural interest in there, into food security. I was on quite a nice PhD stipend. I was pretty good at it, and I was really enjoying it. So as a PhD student, I was really happy. the next stage of the scientific career is to go and be a postdoctoral researcher, and the general advice is go and be a postdoctoral researcher somewhere else. So I went to the States. I went to University of San Diego in California. I went, Southern California by the beach, all lovely, except I made the mistake of continuing with microscopy that required you to sit in a dark room for extended periods of time. And I realized that I actually didn't want to be a research scientist. Everyone assumed that I wanted to be a research scientist. I assumed I wanted to be a research scientist, but 18 months in the States, and I was like, no, this isn't for me. So I'd lost that love of it. And I came back to the UK, and what I realised is, and I was like, why is my PhD and my postdoc so different? And I realised during my PhD, I've done loads of teaching, like far more teaching than my PhD supervisor ever knew that I'd been doing. If there was any teaching opportunity to be doing tutorials, demonstrating, whatever, I was there. And my PhD supervisor, I sort of tacitly knew, but didn't know everything I was doing. I should say, during my PhD in plant sciences is when I met the lovely Katie. So Katie was also in plant sciences in Cambridge a little bit, and we collaborated on a project way back when there. So it's lovely to see you, Katie. But I came back to the UK. I was deciding I hated being a research scientist, didn't want to do that. But I really enjoyed teaching. And I went and spoke to everyone I knew who'd basically been in Cambridge, so obviously a very elite research-focused institution. And I was told there was no such thing as a career in higher education teaching. I'd said, I want to go into teaching in higher education. How do I do that? And a really well-meaning professor, he was really trying to give me good advice, and he was trying to avoid me sort of falling into the trap of chasing something impossible, said, there's no such thing. You need to think about another option. I was like, there's over 5,000 biology students a year graduate in the UK. That's quite a lot of students. Surely some of them need some teaching. Surely there's got to be a little space for little me somewhere. So I sort of ignored this advice and was like, well, I'll sort of persist anyway. So I then ended up forming my career journey, and it sort of worked out. Okay, with a few diversions along the way. So I then became I went back to Cambridge, and I became a teaching fellow and a teaching associate. I did quite a lot of freelance teaching, sort of again, sort of any teacher I can get my hands on. I did, so building up experience there. At one point I was doing 8 tutorials a day. There was a day I talked about protein structure of alpha helices and beta sheets so many times I had to ring a friend of like, please come and say other words to me. I need someone to say non-biology words at me. I was teaching that much. And then about 10 years ago, I moved to become a lecturer in biology at the University of Hull. So I met someone that I knew at a conference who encouraged me to apply, and I got a permanent lectureship at that point. I then became a reader in bioscience education at Hull, so it went up the journey, but was definitely in a biology department. And then I had the opportunity to become a senior fellow of our Teaching Excellence Academy. So that was Hull's academic development unit. And that was a half-time secondment, which was supposed to be 1 year. Turned into 2 years, turned into 4 years. And that was looking at the issue of awarding gaps. So for those unfamiliar, that's the differences in who gets first and 2-1s with different populations of students. So it's very well known across the sector. We have very large Black awarding gaps, Asian awarding gaps, and socioeconomic awarding gaps. So it was a post focus on that. But also more generally on inclusive education. And then I moved to become Director of Learning Enhancement and Academic Practice at BNU earlier this year. I started that role in January, so I still haven't seen out a full year at Buckinghamshire New University. So that's kind of the job roles that I've had. You'll see the job roles seem to get bigger as the slide goes on. There's more words in each job title. Pete asked me to think of some sort of key moments along the way. So I think one of the moments that was really important for me was my first biology education focused conference. So that was run by the Society of Experimental Biology, who've been a really important professional society for me. And they were running a session. It was on digital teaching and learning back in 2014, I think it was. So it was in London, I was in Cambridge, and I was sort of really nervous about asking my boss if I could go to this conference, because it wasn't like a plant biology conference, it was something a bit different. But they said yes, I could go. And that was an absolute revelation, because I found the beginnings of the community of people that cared about teaching and learning. I met some really great people there. Met some professional friends that were really, really important to me. So realizing that there were other people who also wanted something to do with teaching in higher education, that was quite an exciting moment of like, I have people. I didn't know that I had people. There were none of them in Cambridge. I was the only one at the time. But finding out that there was a community there was a really, really important moment for me. I actually, as a result of that, I had a collaboration. So there were 4 of us who were all early career bioscientists who were like, "Oh, you're the only one in your institution. You're the only one in your institution." We wrote a reflective piece together. So I had my first biology education paper published after that, which was like, as a hard scientist, as a geneticist, there's this reflection and first person, and what's this? There's this weird literature. I don't understand any of it. But I got my first paper out as a reflective piece from there. Got the fellowship and got the senior fellowship. I joined the ethics committee. That was quite an important thing for me. I was the pedagogical expert on the ethics committee, which I don't think I felt like an expert at the time, but it kind of put me into much more sort of research space and learned a lot about research design and whatever being on the ethics committee. I got my national teaching fellowship in 2019. And then, I've been publishing along the way. I've just put a few highlights, but my sort of research highlight is last year I got a solo paper in higher education, which I was really, really proud of. Having gone from being a biologist and publishing in biology journals to then being one of the big higher education journals, that was a real achievement going on the way. And then I got my principal fellowship last year. So that's my career journey in the way that we all like to see. This is the honest version, and I always like to share the honest version as well, okay? Because I think these are the things that are as important. So I started with this big transition for me was going from that postdoc, so that research contract, to the teaching fellowship. And the reason that I made that decision is I hated that being a research scientist so much. It made me really unwell. There were a lot of confounding factors. But I had a major mental health crisis at the end of that postdoc. This is not for me. I'm in the wrong place. This is the wrong thing for me. What on earth am I doing? I thought I knew what I was doing. I was really, very, very ill. And it was while I was recovering from that I made that observation of, hang on, it's because you were doing teaching during your PhD. So that recovery period, which at the time was, it was awful. But actually for me, it was a really, really important turning point of like, actually, no, you're not going to be an at the bench scientist. What's going to make you happy, what's going to get you back in that ikigai space is to be in education. And that's kind of why I persisted. I knew that was what was important to me. There's a period of exploitative contracts and precarity. The reason I was doing so many seminars is because I couldn't, I was being paid on 0-hour contracts. So there was a period of deep instability there. Am I ever going to be able to afford to buy a house, start a family, all of those sorts of things? Had a bit more period of things being okay, but then as I've gone through, I've also had to take time out for mental health. Some of you might know I'm actually taking a few weeks off at the moment to just look after myself a bit. And I'm not going to say it's what things that have gone wrong, but it's substantive things that have happened to me. I had my first period of maternity leave while I was a reader in bioscience education, and the second period of maternity leave. Maternity leave 1 coincided with the pandemic, so that was quite challenging. So I always like when I'm doing these sort of career stories is to give you I'll give you the nice version, but I'll also give you the honest version there and those setbacks. But actually for me, I can't unpick my journey into education without doing that reflective piece. Why was I so unhappy as a scientist and so much more fulfilled when I went into education, and the effect that that's had on my own mental well-being is absolutely integral to the way that I think about my career. So that's how I've got there. So there are days that when I'm, looking at deep policy pieces from the OFS, or I'm writing something, writing at the sort of really theoretical end of the discipline. I'm like, how on earth did I get here from being a plant biologist trained to pipette things and look down microscopes? But that's how I've got from one to the other. And just a little bit of theory, but I found it quite helpful. And I actually stretched with my principal fellowship application around Van Lankveld et al. 2017 about developing a teacher identity. And I think these things have been really important to me. So a sense of appreciation. So, positive feedback from students, starting to win awards, starting to get some recognition for what I was doing. that sense of connectedness. Like, I love events like this, of making connections with other people. That first conference I went to was such an important thing. Like, oh, there are other people like me that care about what I do. I'm making connections between people. A sense of competence. So actually, a feeling that you're actually getting good at what you do. That was one of the 4 things on the Ikigai wheel, of being good at it. And I hope that I'm good at it. I hope that I've had that positive influence as I've gone through. That sense of commitment, of like, this is really what I want to do. I believe in this, is where my future is, and that imagining a future career trajectory. So I don't, had you asked, 22-year-old me just finishing my PhD, where are you going to be in 20 years' time? That's a horrible sentence to say. I would have told you at the time, I'm probably going to be a research professor running a research group looking at plants and plants genetics and whatever. But I would never, I wouldn't have even known that being a director of learning enhancement and academic practice was a job title that you could have, let alone it's where I'd end up being. But that, slowly but surely, meeting the right people, being in the right communities, has allowed me to imagine that. And I think, really integral to that has been my research work. So I'm not going to kind of go through all of the research that I've done. You can feel free to look me up on Google Scholar if you don't know my work. I have 2 Google Scholar accounts, just to give you. So I have one that's for all my articles, and one is that for my education articles only, because I've got those 2 bits of my career. So I actually run 2 Google Scholar accounts, and I'm slightly addicted to seeing how they come up. So these are 2 kind of summaries of my 2 different ways of looking at my research outputs. There's a nice tool called Scholar Googler, which makes these nice little word clouds for your Google Scholar account. So if you look at all of my papers, I look like a research scientist. So, Arabidopsis is a species I worked on, circadian rhythms, plants, all of those sorts of things. It looks like a sort of classically biology type profile. But if you look at since 2016. Then you can see it's much more in this teaching sphere. So we've got, we have got things about research, we've got bioscience, we've got students, education, reading, awarding, that speaks to the awarding gaps things, curriculum, community. So you can see I've kind of shifted so that, that is now my primary area. And I actually haven't done any biology research in a very long time. I do work within the biosciences of, how do issues like decolonization and inclusivity, how do they relate to the biosciences? But most of my work now is sort of outside the biosciences and more general. So a few key things that I did that were quite important to me. That was the first reflective piece I did, that challenges and opportunity for early career teaching focused academics. That's the first time I'd ever written anything that wasn't plant biology. That was quite a journey, but really important. And it was a collaboration with other early career folks. I had quite a big project at one point of looking at how students read research papers. So, in the scientific sense, scientific research papers are quite difficult documents to read. So I had a paper in PLOS One about how students read research literature, and that was my most cited educational paper, and that was quite sort of put me on a yes, I've got a bit of a track record here. I then been more recently starting with this paper, sort of going into a bit more higher education policy stuff. So effective including widening participation, university league tables. So we sort of modelled what happens if you actually put your WP data into the university league tables, who comes top, who comes bottom. That was quite an important one. This one's the one I'm really proud of, institution level awarding gap metrics for identifying inequity, useful tools or adulterative distractions. So those of you who are in the awarding gap world, is the awarding gap a useful concept or not? What does it actually measure? What does it not measure? And then a more recent paper I'm really proud of as well. This is a collaboration with a student, and working with students, most of my papers have got collaborations with students in them. So this was a student that I worked with on one, confronting the legacy of eugenics and ableism towards anti-ableist bioscience education. So that's me having gone into education land and now coming back into biology land of what does this mean for biology. So that was a collaboration with a disabled student. And we were really proud of that one. We went into some really interesting, but some really, really troubling literature. And there's sometimes when I do think, as I say, how did I get from looking down microscopes and being a really technical scientist to reading some of this really deep social history and philosophy in there, but I'm really proud of where that's gone. I've made it up as I've gone along completely. So I was trained as a plant biologist. I've never had any training as an educational researcher. I've made it up as I've gone along. I seem to be getting better at it. Still, can I confident tell you the difference between the theoretical and the conceptual framework? I think I'm just about there, but it's taken a heck of a long time. Biologists don't think like that at all. We just get on with experiments. But those are some of the sorts of things that I've been interested in. So I'm going to leave with this slide here, which is my sort of advice for building an alternative academic career, or maybe an education-focused career. And this has been on my social media for a long time. It's been on my social media for so long, I can't find the original one, so I apologise. This is a little bit grainy, but that has been basically my path from thinking this is what I wanted to do to getting there. So getting involved, being original, collecting the evidence, joining communities, communicating what you're doing, finding mentors, and there's some really important people for me along the way, building that academic credibility, accreditation, being aware of not being exploited is increasingly relevant in our sector, unfortunately, career and progression opportunities, looking after yourself. I've had to learn that the hard way, but doing it because you care, to get to your sweet spot of ikigai of higher education, research and leadership. So there you go, that's me.
Thank you very much, Katharine. We're going to open the floor up for questions and discussions. Okay, I'll ask the first question. So obviously you've been all over the place, and I can see, because I for those of you who joined late, and you probably got the gist of my last message in the chat. Katharine is my boss. I see how hard she works and how caring she is as a person. I just wanted to ask, what keep you sane? What keep you motivated? You mentioned a few mental health crises, and I think we appreciate honesty, but what keeps you going? Because you're going, you know what, screw that, I'm going to do something completely not teaching focus and a probably better leaving, to be quite frank. So what keeps you in the game?
That's a really good question. It's a question I definitely should be asking myself more, I think. No, I think in all seriousness, I really, really deeply believe in higher education. It is such a transformative thing, and I'll tell you the story that I tell this story when I'm talking about awarding gaps. So I tell the story of a student called Peter. So Peter, it was a mature student. He'd had a manual work career all his life, and then when he retired, he'd always loved history, and he decided when he retired, they would take his retirement money and go and do a history degree at his local university. And he went, and he absolutely loved it. And he was one of these people that had just piles and piles and piles of history books at home. And went to university and absolutely loved the course. He loved, immersed himself in seminars, talking, the discussions, all the rest of it. But at the end of his degree, he would not put his degree certificate on the wall. He was ashamed of his degree certificate because his degree certificate said Peter, third class. And for a proud working class man, that devastated. And his house was one of the sorts of houses that had like swimming certificates on the wall, anything that the grandchildren had ever done, that was on the wall. And he wouldn't put up his own degree certificate because it said third class, and he was embarrassed about his degree. And the reason I can tell you that story is because that's my granddad. I have my pictures of my granddad literally by my office. I don't know if you can see, but I have him just there. And the reason, and that breaks my heart that someone had that experience. They loved their degree so much, but then he ended up being so upset by the outcome. But if we think about his degree, it was all assessed by traditional end of year exams that he was taking alongside 19-year-olds when he was 67. He had arthritis in his hands. The memory wasn't there. He loved his degree, so he learned so much. But at the end of the degree, he just couldn't do the exams, and was and I find that really, I actually find it quite hard to talk about sometimes. Of it should be this thing of promise, but we let students down, and we let and it becomes really individual and really personalised. So that kind of focusing on it's very easy as I've gone up and thinking about the OFS and TEF and all the rest of it, metrics, and what does this mean? But this means individual people's lives, and what you think can be the smallest interaction with someone can absolutely change the way that someone thinks about themselves, where they're going, what they think about their possibilities. So I think that anchoring back down of these are individual people, it's individual lives, and we're trying to make it better for those people so they can, really fulfill their own potential, excuse me. I think that's where it comes back to. But that's hard, like that's pressure, right? Of like, this is, you're trying to do something that is really ethical and really meaningful, and then you're like, well, if I'm not doing my best in that ecosystem, then am I letting people down? Like, I think it comes with its own pressures, but I always bring it back down to the individual.
I'm going to ask an opinion question that might not necessarily be relevant to your career today or your story, but what are your thoughts on ungrading? Because it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. I'm not really involved in that movement because there's a very specific group of people who kind of push for that. What are your thoughts on that? Because if we don't give grades to students, then how would they, in the traditional sense, progress through the academic sort of journey from undergrad to postgrad to research to whatever they do?
Yeah,
how would we assess them then?
Yeah, it's not really my area of specialism either, and I think it's a really interesting idea, and I think we are obsessed with assessment in higher education. Like, and give me a student, I've not even known them, but could I make a good decision on what degree classification students should get if I got 5 pieces of work from them? Probably. If they've got a breadth of tasks. But how many pieces of work have they submitted through their degree? Probably 30, 35, 40 different pieces of work in there. So I think we know that over-assessment is a problem, but at the same time, we know that assessment is a major motivator of student behaviour, and the whole assessment for learning and that motivation piece. So people have done the extreme experiments of trying to get rid of all graded, and it kind of it definitely carries severe risk. So again, it's not really my core area, but I think we don't. It opens big questions that we should ask as to what's the balance in there, and is it lots of smaller stake things, or is it one big high stakes thing? And I find the distinction between the way that we assess undergraduate, which is dozens and dozens of little tasks, versus the way we assess a PhD, which is just one capstone experience at the end of it that you either pass or you don't. Like the dichotomy between the two I find fascinating, because we do it in the same building, but we think about assessment in such different ways in those two contexts. So I think they're important questions to ask, but what do I think of ungrading specifically? I'm not sure I know enough about it, and I haven't experienced it, but I think it raises the right questions to be asking, even if it's not the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, do you want to just expand on your point? Because obviously you come from a school teacher background, so 100% is a thing in schools.
Yeah, no, just saying that.
Higher education.
Yeah,
just expanding on that, because I've been doing some work with a university in Ukraine, and we're having to scale grades because we don't give 100. Whereas that's a distinct possibility in lots of other cultures and things, and it just shows that I think there's something broken in the system. In that, why can't a student achieve a top grade? And I know sometimes that students end up being very disappointed in the grades that they get in UK universities. But anyway, that's kind of beside. In science, engineering, maths, it is possible though. Yeah.
But that management, particularly, and I had it particularly when I was working with Cambridge, with obviously students who were used to getting the very top A-level grades, and that kind of recalibration of before anything less than a 95% for you was a complete failure, and now 70% is good. Like and we also, because we do such a weird thing, don't we, in numerical marking, is we take. If you take, I don't know, a degree performance or a final year scientific, the richness of whatever thing it is that students have done, then we do this incredibly bizarre reductive process of like, that's a 62% piece of art, or that's a 72% reflection. Like, what a weird thing to do. Like,
I can see that Jenny has a hand up.
Yes.
Sorry, Jennifer. Sorry, I shortened your name purposefully then. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Apologise.
I am
Rude.
Jen, but yeah. Thanks, Catherine. Really inspirational talk. I'm just thinking, how do you go about finding a mentor then? How did you go about finding a mentor to find your identity?
Finding a mentor. To be honest, I've not found. I've sort of more accidentally acquired mentors along the way, I guess. So, so I think particularly I think particularly, and it's nearly always been through community stuff. I think, so professional societies for me have been really important with that. And I think, and I've had multiple different mentors, sort of more formally or informally through my career, and and I think it's okay to be okay. So there was a period of my that. Quite a few, I think, will know Graham Scott, who used to be at the University of Hull, and that was part of the reason for me moving to Hull, was, because Graham was very prominent in the bioscience education, and he was publishing, bioscience, primary bioscience research. I was like, that's a thing that I think I want to get into. I need to go and work with someone who's doing that on a daily basis. So that was quite a big part of my decision to move to Hull at the time. And I think being people on the circuit. So and I actually ran for a while. There's a National Bioscience Educators Network that me and a couple of colleagues set up of connecting bioeducation people into other institutions, because often I think mentors are often very much more useful outside of your immediate circumstance. So I've been paired with a couple of really useful people there. So I think have I actively sought out mentors? No, I haven't, but I've kind of aligned. Actually, you're kind of where I want to be, and sort of getting in people's slipstream, I guess. And that was a big reason for me taking the secondment role at Hull, because I was really blown away by our new Pro-Vice Chancellor in Education, Becky Huxley Binns. I was like, I want to learn from you, I want to work from you, and found a way to do that. So, but yeah, I think that where do I want to be, and I think particularly people who are really invested in education focused thing tend to be slightly more lone voices in their departments often. You might have a department of 15 researchers and 1 or 2 teaching and scholarship type people contracts. So I think that connections beyond disciplines and beyond institutions are really important, because the on the doorstep mentoring is often just not there because people haven't got that experience.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, we were just making a joke about I probably got the last 85% from a very, very strict supervisor at Lancaster, who makes a point about not very rarely giving over 80% just because I'm going to get into trouble, but he's not my supervisor, so he's got no power over me. It's not the British way of working, and if you're from South America, then 95% is more common. I will ask Brett Katie, and I'll CC you in. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you see, I was doing some external examining work yesterday of looking at their mark rubrics, and 80% professional standard work, and it's like, to get 80%, like what more can you ask for? So there's something that will be publishable. Oh no, it's only going to get 80.
Anybody have other questions in relation to mentoring and assessment and marking before I move into kind of more the research journey? Because there's something I kind of wanted to steal Katharine's secrets.
You talk really openly about your mental health as well, and I'm just kind of thinking how we design curriculum to kind of avoid that challenge, because assessment workload is a mental health challenge and a well-being challenge, and what kind of insights you might have around the kind of, I know there's pieces of work around well-being and curriculum design, but your thoughts around what should we be doing in terms of curriculum design to kind of ease that mental load, I guess, on a lot of undergraduate learners that frankly under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely, and we all know within our institutions, but also stories that have hit the national press and whatever. We really do need to take this seriously. So I think absolutely overall assessment burden. As I say, we're obsessed with assessment to the detriment of both students and staff mental health. Like we create so much work for ourselves in assessment. I think for me a lot about inclusivity in general, but particularly with mental health is kind of about that flexibility and actually a bit of trust in the system. So I've seen institutions that have got negotiated assessment deadline, so that within a 4-week window you can pick the date that suits you, rather than we're going to impose a date on you. I think some of that really pragmatic stuff in there But I think it's also, and I think a lot of it is, in terms of institutional policies. So, institutions that have got a self-cert for, one or two things. I self-cert, I was on self-cert away from work for a week. I can do that as a professional. Students should be able to do that as well. So I think a lot of it is, building that compassion and awareness into things like your assessment and feedback policy, which, the two things don't immediately feel like they connect. And often one is very much in the academic thing and the other is very much in the student services. But if our curriculum are driving that, then that's a problem. But I think it's also finding authentic ways to talk about well-being, we're academics. We need to, be very aware of what our own boundaries are and our own expertise are, but opening up a conversation. So for example, when I'm giving a lecture, I didn't do it today. For once, I didn't use Mentimeter. It's very unusual for me not to use Mentimeter, but I always do a well-being poll at the beginning of the lecture, just as people are coming, hey, how are we feeling today? I'm okay, whatever. And I've always got the number of student support and the Samaritans up there, for anyone who's like, I'm really not okay, so doing that in there. And then I would always openly talk about it, being a biologist and a biochemist, it sort of lends it to, here's rather than just giving you a generic molecule, here's serotonin as a molecule, right? Can you identify all the hydrogens in the thing? But then that sort of also talk about the role that it has. But yeah, stress is a genuine barrier to learning. If you're biologically, if your cortisol levels, which are your stress hormone, if your cortisol levels, it starts to like decrease your brain function. Like physiologically, that's what it does. So I think we've got to be having that dialogue, be thinking flexibly, but thinking just pragmatically. And I think what we expect in our professional lives, we often fail to put into our students' lives. And with students with complicated lives and mature students and all the rest of it, why do we treat our students so differently and so in often a very infantilizing way compared to what we would expect as professionals?
John just been showing up what he does at Edge Hill. We can disregard that unless he want to expand on that.
No, I was just kind of just sharing what we're looking at, because we're redesigning all of our validation processes in the university at the moment. So I've been advising on that and looking at programmatic assessment design. So not actually doing programmatic assessment, but thinking holistically about the program and where those assessment points are, and mapping that out so that a validation panel can understand where the assessment's happening, but then ultimately that can go to students then, so that there's a really transparent map of assessment. But yeah, that's what I was going through. But I think, as you were saying, we map it out for ourselves. We know when assessments are coming in, but students might not necessarily know that what's coming up next year or in, and that's, I think you're totally right about the infantilization stuff, and they're adults ultimately.
and I totally agree with. I literally had a conversation with someone yesterday about submission window being a better approach, particularly for online students who are more likely than not working professionals and with other commitments, whatever, then having deadlines, which is in a particular day, and they were shocked. That's even a concept. But then I found it really.
We're just about to rewrite. We're just about to rewrite our assessment and feedback process policy and have a big consultation. That's one of the things I want to get in there.
Yeah, because I found that really ironic that as academics, as people work in academia, we very rarely stick to that line. We always expect a bit of it. I made a joke about,
right?
Oh yeah, I made a joke about something the other day about if there is an extension of a conference proposal submission, it's not a proper conference. We expect those kind of extension, but then when it comes to student submission, no, it's got to be by 4:00 on Thursday, because full stop. So I wanted to move on to asking about your take on the relationship between teaching and research, as in producing publication, because I think the unspoken rule about academia, if you want to progress, you have to publish. But then it's very clear that you are much more focused, much more interested in teaching, educating the next generation of students. So what's your love and hate relationship with research? And do you think it's a necessary evil if we wanted to progress?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting topic, and I'm aware that I might not be representative of the broader education community on here. Like, and that's partly because, coming from a scientist, like genetics is a fast-moving publication by paper kind of field. So I, and I did publish a reasonable amount when I was a scientist. So I guess I've been trained in that world, and I do write a lot. I do publish quite a lot for an education focused professional in the UK, and I know that in terms of the sort of scholarship of learning and teaching, that other forms of outputs are as valuable and often more valuable as case studies. I did the inclusive education framework project I did with a QAA. Those sorts of things often have more impact than the papers. But personally, I really like writing papers. Like I'm a nerd, and I'll freely admit that. But I think I find this an interesting topic, and I find it interesting as a scientist because you often hear, the sort of reward and recognition piece, well, why do I have to publish? Why can't I just be a really great classroom educator? Why can't I be recognised for that? And I get it, and I was there at one point, but then if I think about my scientific career, if I was still a scientist, I would not be pipetting at the bench. I would not be setting up experiments. I would not be making agar plates. I would be writing papers and getting grants and all the rest of it. So I think there is the element of, it doesn't necessarily have to be formal peer review publication, but that nature of making things public, sharing knowledge, advancing the state of knowledge. I think there is something in there that makes us higher education fundamentally. And I think as I say, I wouldn't want people to sort of look at my publication track record and think, oh my goodness, the only way to make it as an education focused academic is to have a publication record like Catherine's. I know I'm, to one extreme of the outputs, because I find it good stress relief. Like weirdly, like if the day job is too stressful, like I'm in control of a document and I'm in control of a graph, particularly if I'm really stressed, then give me a spreadsheet. I'm a very happy bunny. But I think that externality of scholarship in the broadest sense rather than research, I think really is valuable, and that's where if you're not doing those things, I think it's more difficult to make those external connections, to build up that external profile, to have that recognition piece. I really do in fact, I'm beyond spreadsheets. Like, give me a CSV file and R, like that's where I'm really happy. Spreadsheets are in there. But I think that that kind of whole ecosystem, of just the being a really great classroom practitioner is really great, and that's fundamentally what it does. Comes down to making that difference. But I think there is something about that broader reputation, broader standing within the academy. Like, we are higher education. Higher education should be about pushing knowledge forward, and we can do that equally well in education. It sometimes looks a little bit different, but if we're not doing that, then I think that's all of the things that have been written, sort of education focused academics as second class citizens within the academy, reward, all of those things that we've published on for years. So I have personally found that building that credibility both personally helpful, but it's led me to meet people that I wouldn't have known otherwise, and then that's allowed me to then bring new ideas back into my classroom, because I've worked with people in that way, and they've made me think differently, reading other people's stuff. Oh yeah, I'd like to try that out and whatever. So it has positively changed my classroom practice for the better, as well as building up my own research career.
But why can't it be blog and podcast, everyone? My thing,
yeah.
Or conference presentation? I guess my question, in your opinion, why are those non-peer-reviewed outputs lesser of an output than a proper peer-reviewed sort of academic journal? It's not the answer, but your opinion. Why do you think that is the case? Yeah,
I think there is something about the permanence of a written document, right? That I think that does have that longevity. We will always be able to find the written articles from 40 years ago. I do worry about I think there's some great stuff of this webinar recording in 40 years' time. Will we be able to find this webinar recording if I've said something absolutely seminal? Probably no, we won't be able to. I think there is a little bit of that, but I think there is also some snobbery in there. undoubtedly, and fundamentally it's the way the metrics work, isn't it? Like, you can cite a paper but you can't cite a podcast, and there's a and you can, but it's not kind of in quite the same thing. And things like a national teaching repository and stuff have obviously helped us to move that along quite a lot. But I think it's I think there is some there's some baked in snobbery, there's some baked in who are the gatekeepers and what format do they publish in. If your senior leadership are either very academic journal focused, if you've got someone from STEM disciplines, or if you're someone that's from the arts, it's a more monograph type thing. If they're then making the decisions about promotion criteria and all the rest of it, then you end up reproducing. And there's a really great book. I've just moved, so I can't find my copy of it. But the idea of universities being a really narcissistic place, like universities like to see themselves reflected back at themselves. Harshad Keval, I think, is the author of that one. But universities are really narcissistic. They like to see themselves reproduced all the time, so they can't imagine anything other than their own reflection, which I think and that's why you end up getting, the racial biases and whatever in the academy is his main argument. So I think there is something about the permanent thing of of like, this is a definitive record. The conversation that we are having here is a valid conversation. Is it the conversation that I would want immortalized, the exact words that I've used in this conversation? Would I want those exact words to be what was quoted in something else? I would choose my words slightly differently if they were being used in that sense. Whereas if I'm writing, then I've got complete control of the words and the way that I've constructed the argument. I think there is something about that. But there is also, let's be honest, there's just a lot of snobbery and a lot of of research, disciplinary research academics driving the conversations and the cultures. It needs to change. I really like your ladder, your subtle staircase, that of kind of that idea that there's multiple levels, and actually some of the, having a really great blog piece on Times Higher Education or Wonky can have a huge impact through the sector. Having some published case studies here's a really great example of something you can do in practice. And let's face it, I really like publishing my academic articles, and I do keep track of my citation counts. How much have they genuinely influenced the sector? I don't know. Like, I will freely admit that my research output is quite a bit of it selfish because I like doing it.
Everybody needs to. I mean, John, what did your dean tell you? Where's your 5% of selfishness or something, wasn't it? Or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's what I got. Yeah. So Mark Schofield, our kind of Dean of Learning and Teaching, he said, when I started my job, he said, what's your 5% selfish? What's the 5% of your job that you're doing just for you, or the time that you're carving out of 5% of your time just for you, so that you can progress and do better things. So I've tried to maintain that, but it's not always easy.
I think for me as well, unless I'm writing, I'm not reading. I think that's the other thing for me. I'm very bad at just reading for the sake of reading. But if I'm trying to write something, then I get into the literature and I'm learning. So, have I gone into a deep literature dive today? No, I haven't. I've picked on what I already know and I've put it into some slides. But if I was writing an article on this exact topic, I would then be looking at it at a much deeper level, looking at the right theoretical literature and all the rest of it. So for me, it's part of how I keep current. Is I just can't make myself read stuff that's not like essential. Like I guess with policy documents and all the rest, I'm doing enough reading as it is, so that the writing things is a mechanism to read.
Can I ask something based on that then? And
yeah,
it's something in our list of questions that we kind of pre-prepared actually, Puyin, which I think it leads nicely onto that. Has anything about your view of what it means to be an academic changed then in your perception in your transition from being a biologist to a head of an academy or anything like that? Has your perception changed, would you think, or is that?
Oh, that's a really great question. And I'm going to hedge it with just sort of yes and no. Like in some ways, like because I've always had a really strong academic identity, right? I was the bright kid at school that was a bit of a nerd and went to Cambridge, did my PhD at Cambridge, and was very much on that and then was on the you will be a research professor. Like I've got academia kind of running through me. I've never been in a I've never worked anywhere other than universities. It's my identity to the core, and I think there was a bit in the middle where I was in that freelancing, picking up bits and pieces of teaching on, what am I doing, that I don't think I did feel like an academic then, but I definitely do feel like an academic again now. I've just reinvented myself as an academic. And I think partly getting myself back on the ladder was like, okay, well, if I was going to be a research academic, what would I be doing? Right, I'd be making these collaborations, I would be going to these meetings, I would be writing these pieces. And I very actively tried to mirror what my research peers were doing in a teaching way, because that's the only way I knew how to build credibility at the time. Like if I started out now, I don't know whether I'd made the same decisions. So at one level, I'm still an academic in the way that I understood being an academic when I was a PhD student, but I think I've it's obviously broadened out a lot. I think learning from other disciplines, you the further you go up, the more you realize just how different disciplines are. Even as a biologist, the chemists think very differently to the biologists, let alone those in economics or nursing or healthcare or whatever. I think I've been much more aware of how insular academics are, and how and I know some of you come from more of that sort of pracademic background of having had really successful careers in other sectors and then coming in, and there's a lot of literature, and I speak to a lot of people in this who feel that they're not a proper academic, or they feel there's the two-tier thing. And I look at these people who go, you've been a paramedic for 20 years and you've had all of that professional experience, and that's fantastic, and you're bringing why on earth does the sector squash you? I'm sort of quite jealous of people who've had sort of useful careers in the wider world, and we don't do enough to harness that. So that kind of broadening out of what it is, and actually realizing how short-sighted, also how insular the academics are. We have one way of thinking about the world fundamentally, and it's a pretty weird way of thinking about the world. When I was in the inclusive education work, my co-author on all of that was a nursing academic. She'd been a Macmillan cancer end-of-life nurse for 20 years. And then she'd come into universities, and she'd been in universities for 10 years, so nearly half the time. And she would always talk about universities are weird places. They do weird things in weird ways, using weird language, and the people are downright weird. Was like the language that she uses, sort of kind of bringing that, like how particularly sort of first generation students coming in. She's like, I still find it flipping weird that the universities do like this. We forget how weird we are, and how so I think that I've been more aware of the shortcomings of being an academic as I've gone through, rather than becoming more entrenched with it, I think.
What's one last thing? So what's one piece of advice you would give? So some people on this call are doing their PhDs. Some people are established in their own right already, but we are a community that brings together established academics and published academics and PhD students. So what's one bit of advice that you'd give to people just starting out in kind of the world of writing and publishing and wanting to investigate?
Yeah, and the first thing I say, any of you who are starting out in PhD land or research land with other jobs on top of it, I had the luxury of doing my PhD full time immediately after my degree. It was the only thing I was thinking about, and I was immersed in it full time. And what a luxury that was. I genuinely, any of you who are trying to do your PhDs or research alongside demanding jobs, family, career, all the rest of it, I absolutely, my hat's off to you, because it was tough enough doing it full time as a 22-year-old. So you're doing whatever you're doing brilliantly, even if you don't feel like it. You will get it done. And I think the most important thing, particularly for PhDs, is a finished PhD is better than a perfect PhD. So just getting it done, getting it across the line. That persistence. A PhD doesn't reward intelligence; it rewards persistence fundamentally. So I think that's really important. I think for anyone sort of starting out, as I say, I'm entirely self-taught with my educational research. I was trained as a microscopist and as a geneticist. I didn't do an educated PhD. I didn't do an EdD. I've learned it on the job. And I've learned it mainly through working with other people and talking to other people, making those collaborations, bouncing ideas off people. So finding the right people to be able to have those creative conversations, post-it notes on a whiteboard or scribbling it out or whatever it is. I think that finding, because it can be a really lonely experience. And even, in a lab-based PhD, when you've got a research group around you, a PhD student can be quite lonely, but, doing it yourself while you're trying to do your job and everything. So I think, definitely having the right PhD buddies and having people that you can intellectually kick footballs around with in a kind of low risk, high creativity way. I think finding those people is just invaluable.
And I think that's the reason why we accidentally, almost, I'm going to admit, build this community where we kind of get together once a month roughly and have an inspirational speaker such as yourself to kind of just bring it all bring us all together. So it's like a monthly check-in point where, some familiar faces. Now you're still doing okay. You might be struggling, but we're still here. We're still persisting, and I think that's the main thing. So thank you very much, Katharine, for your time. And
thank you for the invite. It's been lovely to talk to you all.